And we spoke to former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull earlier. Welcome, Malcolm. Well, this is a big book, nearly 700 pages. Must have been a lot to tell. Why did you want to write the book?
Well, it's telling my story, my life story. It's had a colourful story, colourful people, lots of ups, few downs, but an important story to be told.
I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a teensy-weensy bit of a reaction over the past few days. Alan Jones has called you a fake Liberal. George Christensen said your book spreads rumour and innuendo. Matthias Cormann says your version of events substantially differs from his own memory. Why should we believe your version? Well,
it's very well documented. There's a lot of footnotes and a lot of details, a lot of primary sources. So
there are times, though, where it's your version or your account of a conversation or things like that. It comes down to a he said, she said sort of a thing. How do you expect readers to navigate that?
Well, I haven't seen anybody actually contradict what I've said, the substance of what I've said. I mean, you refer to George Christensen saying it's rumour and innuendo. It's not a rumour or an innuendo that he was spending nearly a third of the year mostly in Manila while he was being paid to be a Member of Parliament. That's a fact. You
seem to have a political strategy that was, you had enemies within the party, you knew that, but you seem to want to keep them very close to you. How much do you regret that in hindsight?
For me to get things done, I had to work with people who were not necessarily politically or philosophically aligned with me. You know, I'm not a factional person or a tribal person politically. We achieved a great deal, much more than anyone thought possible. So we got a lot done. Stood up to Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, for that matter, and was able to keep the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive, which everyone said was dead when the Americans pulled out.
Malcolm, so you need to leave something for the reader here, OK? I'm just worried you're giving all the plot lines away. But you did mention Donald Trump there, and it's a fascinating chapter. We go behind the scenes. We hear or you read about that famous phone call from your perspective. You shared limo rides with him. There's something called a skiff that you were bunkered down with him, which is fascinating. What do we... If you're a Trump lover, if you're a Trump hater, he's either a genius or a madman. Where does he fall from your perspective?
Well, he is unique. He is unorthodox. He's unconventional. But what you see is what you get with Donald Trump. When he became president, everybody thought that he would be institutionalised, that the system would make him a more conventional president. That was literally everybody's assumption, but that has not been the case. It is extraordinary. And indeed terrifying to watch.
Does he know what he's doing, do you think?
Look, he's highly intelligent and he's very businesslike, at least in his dealings with me. I mean, just to, obviously I dealt with him in a very narrow prism of looking after Australia's interests. It's not my job to tell the Americans how to run their country. But when you're dealing with these people, there is no point sucking up to them because they regard deference as their due. So you've got to stand up for yourself or your country or your company if you're in business.
Can we talk about Abbott and Credlin? Peter's come out this week calling you a reprehensible human being, which is pretty strong words there. Why does she dislike you?
Well, that's one of the nicest things she's ever said about me, actually.
Why does she dislike you so much?
Well, who knows? I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask her. But she and Abbott destroyed their own government, then spent nearly 3 years trying to destroy mine. So they're very good at destruction. It is a bizarre relationship. I've never seen a leader more dominated by another person than Abbott was by Credlin. It's quite extraordinary. It was a completely asymmetrical relationship. And I think she felt that she'd created him, and I think he believed that she had too. But she was basically running the government. I mean, I know that there was some sort of frisson in the News Corp media, which of course is about as complimentary to me as Peter Credlin is, about my making that observation, but it's really a penetrating glimpse of the obvious. Everyone knew that at the time, and that was why so many people were trying to persuade Abbott to move her out of that role.
I think we know now why she feels that way.
Well,
Another of your prominent figures, you were warned not to trust anyone, and Peter Dutton is a key example of that. And you said you didn't see him coming until right at the end. What made you underestimate him?
Well, I probably overestimated his intelligence. It never occurred to me that he would be so delusional as to think that changing leader would advance our electoral prospects, let alone changing the leadership to him. If Dutton, by some tragic circumstance, had become leader of the Liberal Party in that terrible coup week in August 2018, I think the government would have fallen within the following week, and not even Bill Shorten could have lost the following election. But there it is. I was astonished that he was doing that. He basically allowed himself to be used by people that wanted to destroy the government, and had he been elected leader, he undoubtedly would have been, which is why when my government was effectively blown up by Dutton and Cormann, particularly Cormann, I did everything I could to ensure that Morrison succeeded me rather than Dutton. So,
wouldn't Dutton argue, though, that you were toxic in Queensland, he needed to blow the whole thing up? He did. Morrison got in. That was just one possible outcome, and it turned out that that's what saved the election. Like, wouldn't he say that he was right all along?
Well, he could say that. That's like leaping out of a speeding car at 100 miles an hour, and then if by some miracle you land on your feet and don't break your neck, you say, gosh, that was a brilliant move.
Former PMs have been accused of sniping and doing things that are slightly more disruptive to the government than helpful after they leave the job. Can you explain why this is different, releasing this book now, which is clearly at a point where we need to be positive about how we manage this country?
Well, look, OK, compare what I did to Rudd and Abbott. So Rudd lost the Prime Ministership, stayed in the Parliament, and then spent the subsequent 3 years doing everything he could to overthrow Gillard, and finally did. Abbott lost the Prime Ministership, stayed in the Parliament, did everything he could to wreck my government. I lose the Prime Ministership, I get out of Parliament. I'm no longer there. I'm not relevant. I played no part in the by-election, played no part in the election. I'm out of politics. But obviously, I'm a citizen. I'm entitled to have views on issues, and I'm entitled to write a book. In fact, it'd be pretty odd if I didn't.
One of the things that was incredibly compelling in the book was you talking about your descent into depression and the dark place that you went. Can you talk us through what that dark place looked like for you?
Oh, it was very black. I'd never ever given any thought really to my own mental health. It's not something I'd ever thought. Probably hadn't paid a lot of attention to my physical health. I just, like a lot of people, taken everything for granted. And then in 2010, after having lost the leadership at the end of 2009, I just sank into this terrible pit of depression, and it was dreadful. I had suicidal thoughts, constantly in my mind. I couldn't get them out of my mind. I ended up taking antidepressants for a while, then I weaned myself off them. It was very hard, and I made that decision to get out of Parliament, and then decided to stay in. And I made the decision to stay in Parliament as much as anything to survive.
Malcolm, no doubt you would still love to be Prime Minister, but are you looking on with what's going on in the world at the moment with the pandemic, thinking, thank God I'm out and it's Scott Morrison's job to take care of this, or would you love to be front and centre taking care of business?
It is a terrible, unprecedented problem that the government, the federal government and state governments, that they're all dealing with, as are governments all around the world. But I relish difficult tasks and wicked problems, and I can't think of many more wicked than this.
So you're happier outside of politics, though?
Probably calmer outside of politics. But, look, I knew from the time I became Prime Minister, I knew that my Prime Ministership would come to an end. For me, power without purpose is pointless. I'm not somebody that has sought power or high office for its own sake. I'm an activist. I want to do things. And so the reason why I trusted all of my colleagues, even those whom I probably shouldn't have, was because without doing that, without being able to work with everyone, with enemies and frenemies alike, without doing that, I wouldn't have been able to get so much done. I wouldn't have been able to get same-sex marriage legalised, for example. Now, that was a big reform. It was an overdue reform, and it's one I'm very proud that my government was able to deliver.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull's book is called A Bigger Picture, which is appropriate because, as you've heard a few times, big book, very big book. Thank you very much for your time, Malcolm. All the best with the publicity.
Yeah, thanks, Waleed. Thank you all.
It was quite brave and important for him to talk about his mental health issues.
Yeah,
I think
I
that
agree.
would surprise a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think it's really
What surprised
good
me is it was when he lost opposition
Yeah.
leader, not when he lost the Prime Ministership. Yeah.